A stark split-screen moment unfolded today in the nation's capital. It was a clarion call for transparency from the survivors of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, and it was set against Donald Trump and the Trump administration, whose efforts at providing clarity in the Epstein case have been disingenuous at best. Flanked by members of Congress in what is a shockingly rare bipartisan display of consensus these days, survivors gathered on Capitol Hill this morning and called for the release of the Epstein files. They spoke one after the other. Here's a bit from their accounts.
I met Ghislaine when I was a senior in college. I was just 21 years old. Maxwell introduced me to Jeffrey Epstein later on that day. That evening was the sliding glass doors moment that changed the trajectory of my entire life. I was once bright, fun, outgoing, and kind. I loved people, and people genuinely enjoyed being around me. But after meeting Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, it felt like someone shut off the lights to my soul.
Ghislaine, it was your butler that greeted me at the front door of your beautiful home. And it was your calm, manipulative, and fraudulent demeanor that cultivated my trust. That coercive system that you have mastered was entirely end-game oriented. And that end game was to feed the perversion of you and Jeffrey through sexual violence.
They spoke today. It was part of a public push to have all of the Epstein materials and files released. The petition that would make that happen, that would trigger a vote in Congress on the bill releasing the Epstein files, at this point just needs the support of 2 more Republicans. Here's what the survivors had to say about that.
It's time for us to see beyond the curtain. Why was Jeffrey Epstein so protected? Who is still being protected?
So I ask you, President Trump and members of Congress, why do we continue to cover up sexual abuse and assault? Who are we covering for?
And to be clear, the only motive for opposing this bill would be to conceal wrongdoing. You have a choice. Stand with the truth, or with the lies that have protected predators for decades.
Donald Trump and his administration have made that choice. The White House says that supporting the bill that would trigger the release of the Epstein files would be viewed by them as, quote, a very hostile act to the Trump administration. And here's what Donald Trump said in the Oval Office about the Epstein case just moments after the survivors finished speaking.
So this is a Democrat hoax that never ends. You know, it reminds me a little of the Kennedy situation. We gave him everything over and over again, more and more and more, and nobody's ever satisfied. And I think it's enough, because I think we should talk about the greatness of our country and the success that we're having.
Okay. Now, the idea that the Epstein case is a hoax is something that Trump's own base of supporters, the most fervent ones, don't even believe. Neither do his most prominent allies. Laura Loomer puts it this way: would Ghislaine Maxwell be serving time in prison if it was all a hoax? Good point, Laura Loomer. Again, Donald Trump made those comments we just showed you minutes after survivor after survivor after survivor of sexual violence came out and publicly told her story about how Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell recruited them and manipulated them and exploited them and sexually abused them. Many of them talking about how they are, to this day, still traumatized and grappling with and struggling to recover from that trauma. Here's what one of the survivors said about Donald Trump's baseless claims of all of this being a hoax just moments before he spoke.
The president has said that this Epstein issue is a hoax, is the words that he used. Can we get your reactions to what you think when you hear him say that?
I'll answer that. Mr. President Donald J. Trump, I am a registered Republican, not that that matters because this is not political. However, I cordially invite you to the Capitol to meet me in person so you can understand this is not a hoax. We are real human beings. This is real trauma.
What does it feel like emotionally to hear that?
It's being gutted from the inside out. Not that I would know what that feels like, but I imagine it's the anxiety buildup with the depression and the survival mode, and then your nervous system goes limp and ironically is shot. And it feels like you just want to explode inside because nobody, again, is understanding that this is a real situation.
Donald Trump finding himself today on the other side of the survivors of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, including at least one registered Republican, as they push to release all of the Epstein material. It's where we start today. Tara Palmieri is here. She writes the Red Letter on Substack and has hosted 2 acclaimed podcast series on this topic called Broken, Jeffrey Epstein and Power, the Maxwells. Also joining us is my friend and colleague, MSNBC senior political analyst Alex Wagner-Spack. And back with me at the table for the hour, investigative journalist, host, and co-producer of the podcast, Chasing Ghislaine, Vicky Ward is back with us. What did you think?
I thought it was so powerful, Nicole, and so not political. I have to say, for me, the biggest headline was the first speaker, Anoushka DiGiorgio, for 2 reasons. One, I watched her testify under a pseudonym, Kate, at Ghislaine Maxwell's criminal trial. And to my knowledge, this is the first time that she has now come forward and sort of identified herself as one of the 4 key witnesses at that trial. The other thing about Anoushka DiGiorgio is she knows Donald Trump very well. I've reported this. It was reported many years ago that she met him through Ghislaine Maxwell, and they spent a weekend at Mar-a-Lago. So the fact that at the end of her remarks, she talked directly to President Trump and said, "You have the power, please use it in the correct way," that was very meaningful.
Tara, what did you learn today, or what did you see platformed that brings what this should all be about for everybody into focus? And that's centering all of our conversations, as you do, around the victims themselves.
I have to agree with Vicky that it really didn't feel political. I felt more of a story about humanity. And hearing these women, when President Trump called it a hoax, and they responded saying, "We're people. We're human beings right here. We're not a hoax. You can come here and see us for yourself. I will talk to you." One of the victims addressed the president directly. "President Donald J. Trump, come here. I am a human being. You know, I'm not a hoax." And I think as that was happening, there was this incredible moment. You'd have to be there to really feel it. But there was a flyover, a V of these military planes just going over the victims as they were speaking, and they had to stop because it was so loud. And this was a flyover that the president arranged at the same time as the president of Poland is visiting him. And it was almost like a symbolism of silencing the victims in their moment. Right there, while they're not even inside the Capitol where they should be on the House floor testifying and telling their truth, because they haven't been invited to do that. No, they're standing on the grass outside of the House, of where some of the most powerful people in the world sit that can decide their fate and the fate of so many other hundreds and hundreds of victims that just want the truth out there. There was just such an imbalance in so many ways. And it reminded you a lot about the fact that this is a class story about the elites versus the people without power, and the struggle. You saw the struggle play out outside on the lawn, and with the men inside, you know, some women as well in these meetings deciding, "We know what's best for you, little lady. We're protecting the innocent." Who are the innocent?
Joining us now, NBC News congressional correspondent Julie Sirkin, NBC News national law enforcement and intelligence correspondent Tom Winter, and the Bulwark senior reporter Will Sommer. All right, so Julie, how much pressure is there on Republicans right now?
Well, there is an immense amount of pressure, not only because they kept hearing from constituents back home, who certainly members of their base, contrary to what the president said is a Democrat hoax. Republicans want to know this information, too, because as we've covered extensively, this was a box that was reopened, a can of worms that was reopened by the Trump campaign itself leading up to this last election. And so this is an issue that is not going away on Capitol Hill anytime soon. You'll forgive me in advance as I'm looking over my shoulder, just in case the speaker strolls by me, as the House just started voting here a couple of minutes ago. But what he told my colleague Kyle Stewart literally minutes before I came to talk to you, Katie, is he once again praised the victims and survivors for coming forward. He said it is not an easy thing to do, but he also, as he's been saying consistently, criticized the discharge petition itself, saying there are not adequate protections for victims who do not wish to be identified. Johnson saying 10 spoke out today and did so bravely, but there are 1,000, in his words, that might not want to be identified. Even though Massie and Khanna have numerously told me, they've said publicly, that there are protections crafted in their discharge petition to prevent any of these victims' names from coming out who do not wish to be identified. Critically, Katie, what I did hear from this press conference this morning is that these women, these survivors, they're done waiting. They don't trust the government. They don't think there will be transparency at the end of this, though they are hoping that at least 2 Republicans join those other 4 who have signed on to this petition in forcing the administration's hand here. They said that they are getting together to put together their own list. One of them, Lisa Phillips, said, we know the names. We know who did this to us. And they said confidentially they're going to put together this list, although unclear if they're going to release it to the public. But ultimately, they said this isn't our job. It's on the DOJ and on Congress.
So there is this argument from Donald Trump, even from people on the right. Donald Trump's calling it a hoax, but he's also saying, Tom, that DOJ is releasing information. They're giving it to the House. They did that interview with Maxwell. Is this information that is new?
No, most of it is our court filings that we've reviewed several times, if not dozens of times. There's the files that were provided by public information request from the Palm Beach County State's Attorney's Office in Florida. So that information has been out there. Those were the original investigative files, along with the Palm Beach Police Department. So those are contained within there. It's all the public filings in the Maxwell case, which are voluminous. And there are a number of filings from the Epstein case as well. A lot of those things, members of Congress talked about redactions today. By the way, those redactions are court ordered, so that's nothing that Congress is going to get around. That's a judicial branch function. So the challenge here going forward is the limited new information that we have are redacted documents that show flights and trips that Jeffrey Epstein took with a number of other individuals leading up to 2019. That includes international travel, because that would have obviously involved Customs and Border Protection. But the names of those on the flights, not just the pilot or the captain, members of the crew, those are redacted, but additional males and females, those names are redacted as well. So there's nothing on there that provides any new information as far as who Epstein was traveling with. People got initially excited because there was some financial information that was all made public as part of the Epstein bail application when he was first arrested. So really, there's not much more that's there. For the Justice Department to turn over more information would really start to cross some red lines for them, because in the past, they've been reticent to provide case files to Congress. They're incomplete. FBI 302s are summaries of an interview. I mean, you and I could write up a one-page summary of this show, but we wouldn't capture all the nuance, all the detail, and everything that went into it. And that's what those documents are. There's other documents in there that name, there could be a sheet that says we got a tip call saying that Katie Tur and Tom Winter are involved in a public corruption scheme in New York City. That doesn't mean it's true. It just means that they got a tip call. But can you imagine how the internet in 2025, September, would react to somebody who would get a tip on that?
This is why you don't play with conspiracy theories.
It does. And so to back it up to the reason why we're talking about this today, the victims on Capitol Hill, the emotion there was so raw still. And they talked about on several occasions, every single time this comes up in the news, all of these stories that have no basis in truth. Every time they hear it on the radio or listen to a podcast on the way to drop their kids off at school, it's what parents are talking about at schools as they're dropping off their kids. They cannot get out of this, even if they want to, because they're inundated with story after story after story. And then today, the internet erupted again. There is a list. The victims are talking about a list. No, what the victims are talking about is a list of individuals potentially who they think could have known about this activity that was occurring, or that could have been involved in Epstein's world in facilitating this for Epstein. There's also another subset of that where, according to one of the plaintiff's attorneys, Brad Edwards, there are some women that once they turned of age, over the age of 18, that they then were either sexually contacted, abused, or were given to on behalf of Epstein, which is kind of a perverted phrase, but given to these wealthy men that were friends of Epstein. That's a separate group, and presumably a much smaller one based on our reporting. So all of this is now out there, and the victims are now part of what has become a broad kind of a conspiracy talk about this case.
One of the knots is that it's hard for people to believe, certainly hard for those survivors to believe, that this was something that was just being perpetrated and planned by two people. It was just Ghislaine Maxwell, and it was just Jeffrey Epstein. Just the two of them were able to inflict this much damage on so many women for so long. That's what's making this hard to understand for a lot of folks. If that's they just can't believe that that is the case, and they believe they're going to find more information in some files that are locked away in a closet at DOJ.
Right, and I think that it's important to go back to our reporting, which is separate and apart from what the DOJ and FBI put out in an unsigned, undated memo earlier this summer, which is that if there's not even enough information to open a case on an uncharged third party at this point. I think some of the women victims are speaking about those who worked for Jeffrey Epstein at a point. How could they not know based on the fact that I'm a 14, 15, 16-year-old girl, and I'm being requested and scheduled to go to Jeffrey Epstein's apartment? Like, isn't that weird? Wouldn't that stick out to somebody? Shouldn't somebody have said something? Aren't there enough people that know about it? To that end, on the victims' front, some of that has come out in testimony at trial. Some of it didn't, because obviously it has to be tailored towards the person who's charged, in that case, Ghislaine Maxwell. Could there be more information in these files on that? It appears so, for certain. So, yes, there are some additional avenues. Certainly the idea of the FinCEN in the SARs that were generated by Epstein, some of the questions that Congress has previously raised about that. I'd love to get access to those. Those would be the types of things.
There's also the sweetheart deal that Epstein got.
So there's this almost 400-page report by the Office of Professional Responsibility for the Department of Justice, which is kind of like the internal affairs of DOJ and prosecutors. They talked to Alex Acosta, who was, of course, the former Trump labor secretary, the U.S. attorney in Florida at the time. They talked to all the prosecutors that were involved. They reviewed their emails. They reviewed their schedules. And they issued a detailed report, which we've done our own reporting on and have put out there. So that information is there. Ultimately, unless somebody comes forward and says there was a quid pro quo deal here, there was some transaction that took place that we don't know about, the phone lines are open for that. If that's the case, I think that's something that needs to be looked into. But so far, investigators that have looked at it haven't seen any evidence of that to date.
All right. So, Will, Tom and I just went through a lot of the naughtier parts of this. I wonder, there was so much buzz about Epstein just a few months ago before the summer recess. I know Speaker Johnson, certainly, the White House might have hoped that the summer would cool things off. Get this story to die down. Donald Trump has certainly done a lot since then to if not overtly distract, then to distract from the Epstein files. Has it done so? What's the word on the MAGA street?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can see here how much narrative power Donald Trump has over his base and the right-wing media. As you said, when the DOJ initially closed this case this summer, there was a lot of outrage on the right saying, you know what, we want to find out what's in the files. But I think as it's become clear that perhaps there's something embarrassing about Trump in the files, or that just basically that he doesn't want it to get out, he's calling it a hoax, we're seeing a lot more of a blackout in right-wing media. Fox News barely mentioned it last night in prime time. Although at the same time, online, I'm seeing a lot still demand from the grassroots to see these files. I think the question of where this story goes for the right really depends on whether Thomas Massie can get enough Republicans to join him in this vote, or whether they're just going to go with Donald Trump's claims that it's a hoax.
That is a very good point. There's polling out there that suggests that the public broadly does not trust the president on this. I'll put it up on the screen. So 67% disapprove of Trump's handling of the Epstein files. 73% disapprove or say the DOJ has not been transparent. This is Quinnipiac poll. It's a pretty well-respected polling company. Those numbers are high, Will.
Yeah, I think no matter what happens here, whether this, obviously Republicans want to make this look like this is some Democratic witch hunt. I think whatever happens here in terms of how hardcore Trump supporters view it, I think this is something that still affects independent voters, that affects maybe lean Republican voters. It's a lot to swallow. I mean, and I think it kind of depresses some Republicans as well. This is something they were told was a really, really big deal, and suddenly they're being told, get over it. And so that's something that maybe makes them have more doubts about Trump.
Political analyst and Democratic strategist Cornell Belcher and former Republican Congressman of Pennsylvania, Charlie Dent.
Cornell, you know how you know?
I don't know where he's going.
Excited for it, though.
That this is a load of crock.
How's that?
Because if the good Governor Landry had such a problem in New Orleans or Shreveport, what the hell have you been doing all this time as governor? Right.
Is the National Guard under his purview?
And the National Guard is under his purview. So why do you need Donald Trump to come into your state to get the National Guard to deal with your crime problem? And if that's the case, then why the hell are you governor? Because you haven't done the job. You've allowed this to fester under your watch. And you're so incompetent at this point that you need the help of the President of the United States to validate your incompetency. So I don't understand. Help me understand what I'm missing, because as a former lieutenant governor of a state, I know damn well that if it's happening on my watch in Baltimore or Prince George's County, Anne Arundel County, that's on us. And if we're calling the president to come in, then we really messed some stuff up.
Yeah. Well, I think you're on to something, but I don't think it's about crime, right? If you
no, it's not about crime.
I don't think it's about crime.
No.
Newsflash, I don't think it's about crime. Look, if you look, this is classic politics, right? If you look at the Wall Street Journal poll that was out just yesterday. Wall Street Journal, not necessarily a bastion of liberalism, right? Their poll finds stunning economic angst happening in this country, where more and more Americans are thinking the American dream is moving away from them. They think the economy is growing worse, not necessarily better, and they're thinking, behold, that the leaders in Washington actually aren't perhaps up for the job, right? So the economic angst is growing. People are really concerned about the economy. And this was someone who's supposed to fix the economy overnight. So the economy is going wrong. Let me change the subject.
Right.
Let me go back to what is tried and true in this country since this country was founded, and let's pull out boogeymen to scare people and change the subject, because and nothing works more effectively as a boogeyman than the specter of black crime in urban America.
Well, this is very true.
And in his case, black crime with the companion of immigration.
With the companion of immigration. And I mean, I think that's the point for me, Charlie. One, we have long said at this table that Donald Trump is going to start by targeting black mayors in Democratic states that have Democratic governors, but it's not going to stop there. Like, the mayor of Shreveport, Louisiana, is actually a Republican. At one point, he was a Democrat, but like a different mayor, right? So it's switched back and forth. But I do think that Donald Trump is kind of treating the National Guard as like his own police force, and you couple that with what they have done with ICE, injecting billions of dollars into their budget. HSI, the vests that people see here in Washington, D.C., that they saw in Louisiana, that they saw in L.A., that they may see in Louisiana, that they're probably going to see in Chicago, those HSI vests, that's Homeland Security investigations, coupled with some ICE people. Who do they really work for, and what do they really do? So I do think that this is a pretext for his authoritarian overreach, because I really just think this is all about the election. Because what Cornell is saying about the economy is right. People are very unhappy, but maybe I have it wrong.
Well, the politics of this is all scrambled. I have never met a mayor. I represented an urban area as a Republican, city of Allentown, Bethlehem. And every mayor I ever wanted, they wanted federal support for law enforcement. They didn't want the National Guard to come in, but they wanted the COPS grants funded. And I was in a minority of House Republicans who supported the COPS grants. Many of my Republican colleagues were wanting to cut the COPS grants. And because the Republican argument at the time by many was, law enforcement is a state and local function, not a federal function. But the truth is, mayors around the country for years, and some governors, have wanted more federal support for good reason.
Yeah, they want the money.
Yeah, I mean, even in D.C., okay, where arguably the president has some authority to deploy the Guard, the mayor's been a little bit more muted here because carjackings are down. Maybe we're going to learn something, but I don't know. This is a totally. I'm concerned about posse comitatus out in L.A. I mean, deploying the Marines Well, I can see why a judge found that to be unlawful. It's a violation of posse comitatus. So we're in a really strange place. But as Michael pointed out, most mayors are not going to want to, or governors are going to want to deploy the Guard because they're going to acknowledge that maybe they haven't been able to manage things on their own. You know,
right.
these mayors, they don't want to admit failure. But we have a crime problem in a lot of places.
But also, wait, the Guard, though, the Guard's not trained to do crime prevention, and they're not police.
Today, multiple outlets are reporting that Donald Trump is attempting to tip the scales of New York City's mayoral election by offering some of the candidates jobs in the administration in order to help Andrew Cuomo defeat Zohran Mamdani. Ever since the 33-year-old Mamdani won the Democratic primary in June, the Fox News viewer, who is our president, has been taking a special interest in the New York City race.
If a communist gets elected to run New York, it can never be the same, but we have tremendous power at the White House to run places when we have to. You have a lot of crooked things going on in New York. We're going to straighten out New York. Maybe we're going to have to straighten it out from Washington.
Now, the New York Times is reporting that advisors to Trump are trying to induce the current incumbent mayor, Eric Adams, to leave the race by dangling an administration job for him. Quote, the talks have also involved finding a possible place in the administration for the Republican candidate, Curtis Sliwa. Citing 3 people with knowledge of the discussions, the Times reports the goal would be to give former Governor Andrew Cuomo a better chance of defeating Mamdani in November's general election. Politico reports Adams has been offered a position at the Department of Housing and Urban Development, according to a person with direct knowledge of the offer, and that the mayor met with the president's team during his visit this Monday, to Florida. A spokesperson for the Eric Adams campaign said Mayor Adams has not met with Donald Trump. He is not dropping out of the race. But it would not be the first time Trump has used Adams to influence New York City politics. Of course, you'll remember, shortly after taking office, Trump's Department of Justice dropped corruption charges against the mayor in exchange for Trump-favored immigration policies and cooperation from the mayor for them. That move prompted the resignation of over half a dozen prosecutors in both Manhattan U.S. Attorney's Office and Main Justice, including the acting U.S. Attorney for the Southern District. Joining me now to respond to all this news on a very busy day is the Democratic candidate for New York City Mayor, Assemblyman Zohran Mamdani. It's good to have you here. Nice to meet you in person for the first time.
Good to be here. Thank you for having me.
So what do you think about all this?
I think it's outrageous. And I think oftentimes in a race such as this, it's tempting to think of this solely in the question of how does this impact the race? But this is an affront to our city's democracy. This is an affront to the values that make so many of us proud to be Americans, that we could choose our own leaders, not that our leaders pick themselves or their friends. And we're seeing in this time when Donald Trump has taken snap from hungry New Yorkers, has passed legislation that would throw millions of New Yorkers off their health insurance, that we have Democrats in Andrew Cuomo and Eric Adams working with this administration to try and subvert the will of Democratic primary voters right here in New York City.
Is there a Democratic argument that there's some problem with this split field of 4 candidates that ends up with a person being the mayor of the city with 40% of the vote? Like, is there, because we have, we had the ranked choice voting in the primary, which I think is an important thing. You've now got this very weird situation where the next mayor might win 35, 40% of the vote. And there's a question about what that would mean for that mayor's representative ability in the city.
I don't think any of those questions are motivating Donald Trump or
that's fair.
Thinking about the actions that they take. And I think that if this was just a question of am I going to face 3 candidates or 1 candidate, I wouldn't have concerns. I'm just as confident of beating Andrew Cuomo today as I was yesterday. My concern, however, is what these so-called leaders are willing to give up in the name of securing power. That is why so many New Yorkers are turned off by our politics, because they see no relevance of their struggles in the conversations that are taking place.
There's reporting over the summer that there's a phone call between Donald Trump and Andrew Cuomo, previously undisclosed, reported by the Times August 6th, that Trump spoke about the race directly with Cuomo, an old associate and foil, according to 3 people briefed on the call who were not authorized to discuss it. Andrew Cuomo denies that they talked about the race. Is your read on this situation that Trump is pulling for Cuomo?
Absolutely. And I think Trump is making that very clear, that this is his choice for mayor of New York City. It's Andrew Cuomo. And he's willing to use every single tool and tactic at his disposal to try and assist Andrew Cuomo in that same pursuit. And what we're seeing right now is to offer and consider positions for two candidates in this race to try and make this one-on-one. It shows just how threatened he is by what our administration would be, which is a fulfillment of the thing that he ran on but has since betrayed, which is a promise of a more affordable life for Americans.
You know, for people that are watching this that consider themselves, you know, Democrats are sort of in the big tent, right? And say they're in the big anti-Trump coalition, okay? And you know, they've known Andrew Cuomo as a known quantity for a long time. And there's a feeling right now as they watch sort of Governor Pritzker in Illinois and Governor Newsom and, you know, mayors in Chicago and D.C. and Baltimore deal with this sort of Godzilla-like figure, right, who's sort of wreaking havoc all over the places, that we need someone who's strong, who's experienced, who can go toe-to-toe, who maybe is kind of a tough guy. And this Zohran Mamdani seems like a nice guy. You know, he seems charming. He's 33 years old. Like, do I think that's the guy that can go toe-to-toe with the threat that is Donald Trump, as opposed to Andrew Cuomo, who's really been around the block?
Let's take the example of California. When Donald Trump deployed the National Guard to California, one of the key ways in which they responded was working together with the mayor of LA, the governor of California, the attorney general, all coming together to file a lawsuit that a judge just yesterday found that deployment was illegal. Can you imagine Andrew Cuomo working with the Attorney General of this state, whose endorsement I am proud to have, Tish James, the Governor, Kathy Hochul, to work together to fight Donald Trump when he's spoken to Donald Trump more than he's spoken to Kathy Hochul over the course of this race? This is a man who believes in nothing other than his own power. And he spent so much of the primary saying he was best positioned to fight Donald Trump. He's now spending the general saying he's best positioned to work with Donald Trump. And New Yorkers want a mayor who is accountable to them, not to someone in the White House who is looking to rip up the very fabric of the city.
Being New York mayor, to me, strikes me as probably the hardest job in America, in American politics after president. I mean, I really like, and it's basically your job for everyone to hate you, essentially. You know that, right? No one's gonna be like, hey, buddy. Like, everyone's kind of pissed off all the time because it's New York City. It's New York City, yeah, right? Like, life is tough. Like, things are crowded, things are expensive. Like, there's a lot of reasons for that. But then on top of that, right? So it's a hard enough job in normal times. But I mean, as we're watching him threatening to send in the National Guard to Illinois, no respect for like the law as it stands. Like, you can't bound yourself within some confines of like, well, he won't do that because it's illegal. Like, how are you thinking about preparing for the job itself in terms of having this threat looming over it?
You have to prepare for the inevitability of Donald Trump to continue being Donald Trump. We cannot, as you've said, rely on any notion of the law or what is appropriate for how he will determine his course of actions. And I look at California as an example, such that we are ready here in New York City on January 1st with a plan of partnership across city and state government to be ready, whether it's for the deployment of the National Guard or it's for his attempt to pass legislation like the one he just did, which will take an axe to so much of what keeps so many New Yorkers afloat. And I think we've seen what New York City can gain if we have a mayor who is willing to collaborate with Donald Trump, which is not that much at all. We've had money directly taken out of bank accounts. We've had a 6-year-old public school student from Jackson Heights being deported. This is what we have when you want to work with Donald Trump. We've seen what it looks like to manage Donald Trump, which is what we see in Andrew Cuomo. We need someone who's actually willing to fight Donald Trump. And we've seen examples of that right here in New York with Kathy Hochul. We've seen examples of that in California. It's time to have that in City Hall.
You have not yet received an endorsement from Hakeem Jeffries, who, of course, is the highest-ranking member of Congress and a member of the New York delegation. I know you've met 4 times. Kathy Hochul has not officially endorsed yet, if I'm not mistaken. You would have to work with both those individuals quite closely. Are you confident that should you win, those are going to be solid relationships?
Absolutely. And so many of the conversations we've had have been about the importance of partnership, because New Yorkers have grown tired at the ways in which Albany and City Hall were at war when Andrew Cuomo was leading the state. They want leaders who understand that they have the same constituents in New York City and they have to serve those constituents. And one thing I've appreciated through all of these conversations is the question of how do we deliver affordability to the residents of the most expensive city in the United States of America?
One of the people who was in that sort of battle, standoff with Andrew Cuomo when he was governor, as mayor, was Bill de Blasio. We covered that. I watched it as a New Yorker. Today, Bill de Blasio endorsed you for mayor. So that's someone who's had some experience on both sides of that. Assemblyman Zoran Mondani, the Democratic candidate for mayor in New York. Great to have you. Thanks a lot.
Sir. Thank you.
After days of speculation about his health, the president showed up for a much-anticipated press conference yesterday to make some big announcement. He was moving a military command from Colorado to Alabama. But amidst the usual Trump chaos, he made another announcement that got kind of lost about a military strike in international waters.
We just, over the last few minutes, literally shot out a boat, a drug-carrying boat, a lot of drugs in that boat. We have a lot of drugs pouring into our country, coming in for a long time. And we just, these came out of Venezuela and coming out very heavily from Venezuela. A lot of things are coming out of Venezuela, so we took it out.
The president later posted a video of that strike to social media. Trump said he had ordered, quote, a kinetic strike against positively identified Tren de Aragua narco-terrorists. He added that 11 people on the boat were killed. Trump claimed the boat was transporting illegal narcotics heading to the United States. Now, here's a map of where the United States is. That small boat was attacked off the coast of Venezuela, which is over 1,000 nautical miles away from here. The United States was obviously well out of range of that boat. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, on the other hand, defended the strike by saying the vessel's destination was probably Trinidad or another country in the Caribbean, which, of course, makes more sense on the map. I mean, Trinidad's only 10 miles from Venezuela by sea. But again, that, too, is more than 1,000 miles from the U.S. mainland. Who knows where the drugs, if they were there? We're going to go next. This morning, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth was doing a victory lap, promising more military strikes on narco traffickers, narco terrorists. But now, as we learn more details of the attack, I have to say, this is an enormous scandal that is unfolding right in front of us. This civilian, non-military boat, even if they were committing a crime, was not struck in self-defense. No weapons were evident. Whoever struck it, and the U.S. has shared no details of that, didn't try to disable the engines or to board the craft. They just summarily killed everybody on board. As a Notre Dame law professor told the Washington Post, the strike violated international law. The U.S. is not in armed conflict with Venezuela or its criminal elements. This is exactly the kind of operation that, if it existed in a Tom Clancy novel or movie, would be getting covered up because all the principals in the film would know it was illegal. I mean, it certainly seems like extrajudicial murder to me. And again, that's the case even if everything the administration is saying is true. But why would anyone assume that what they say is true? These are the very same people that falsely claimed a man with an autism awareness tattoo and a makeup stylist and a soccer player and a singer were dangerous members of the same Venezuelan Tren de Aragua gang when they grabbed them off the street and shipped them to the Salvadoran gulag. Now, in those cases, Trump's government tried to be the judge and the jury, and now they are executioner too. Whatever pretext this administration may claim, this looks, for all the world, like a just flagrant violation of domestic U.S. law and international law. And there needs to be answers to how and why this happened. And I'll talk to Senator Chris Van Hollen about that next.